Would you buy a newspaper publishing company in 2025? Of course you wouldn't. It's an industry in structural decline. No matter how good you and your team are, you're always going to be fighting against the environment around you. In business, we'd call this a headwind. And it's the same in aviation. When you're flying into strong winds, you spend so much more fuel, have to work your engines even harder, and in the worst case scenario, you run out of fuel altogether and crash from the sky. A tailwind is the opposite. The winds are behind us, every mile easier. But how do we find these, and how do we tell them apart? So far in this series, we've pretty faithfully followed Buy Then Build and Main Street Millionaire and their processes for deciding what kind of business we should buy. But in this episode, I'm adding my own. You won't find this in their playbooks, and that is the hunt for tailwinds, the businesses and industries we can buy that have an advantage already in our economy. But how do we find tailwinds? We could look at external sources like this McKinsey report, which is 213 pages of analysis done by a team of experts to identify the areas of competition for the future. We can see that this breaks down largely into 18 different categories. We can also look around us. We don't need a consulting company to tell us what we can see so clearly in our environment. We can see that we have an aging population and that the care of old people is going to be a growth area of the future within the UK. We can also see that the UK summers are getting hotter and we have a greater need for cooling. And anecdotally, I can see so many more people are putting in air conditioning in my neighbourhood in the last few years. Tailwinds come from two main sources. We have regulatory tailwinds. This is the government making decisions and putting in policies to support an outcome. For example, the UK's net zero commitment is a legislative tailwind. Conversely, we also have consumer behaviour-driven tailwinds. For example, we can see cooling as something that is driven by the needs and wants of individuals, independently of what government wants.
This is where the filters come together. Zone of genius, sales, and tailwinds. Each one narrows the field, but together they point to a very specific sweet spot. For me, with strengths in operations, systems, and mentoring, sales points me towards service businesses that are systemizable, resilient, and often behind on digital. Add in the tailwind of UK decarbonisation and the rising demand for cooling, and heating and cooling becomes a natural fit. This is not just a business that I could run, it's one where I'd have an unfair advantage. These companies all tick the sales boxes. They're stale in how they operate, still running on paperwork and slow processes where digital transformation would unlock a competitive edge, especially when competing against other businesses still using legacy tools. They're old in the best sense, proven business models that have already performed for years, weathered economic cycles, and shown steady demand over time. The competition is weak, or at least it's not cutthroat like an AI startup. Modernizing operations and building in AI, automations, and other digital-first tools will allow us to take market share. And they're simple. These aren't complex models you need a PhD to understand, and they're also simple to explain to others, which matters a lot if you're speaking to investors, banks, or even convincing your spouse that this is all a good idea. That's where my zone of genius comes in. I can bring in digital transformation, modern quoting tools, automated grant forms, maintenance plans that create recurring revenue. Even AI can play a role, giving customers quotes in minutes instead of days. In an industry where most companies are still doing things slowly and manually, that gives me a real competitive edge. It's an edge I just wouldn't have if I went into another IT company or chased the latest AI trend. Your filters might stack up very differently from mine. Imagine someone with a corporate background in supply chain management or procurement. They look at the same demographic tailwind of an aging population, and instead of heating and cooling, they see an opportunity in mobility equipment, walkers, stair lifts, and products that help people stay independent at home. These are proven products with steady demand, but most of the businesses supplying them are stale, still relying on catalogs and trade reps. The market is fragmented, the branding weak, and digital sales are underdeveloped. With a supply chain background, that person could go beyond distribution and design their own products, flying to China to source directly from manufacturers, setting up their own brand, and bringing in higher margins by cutting out middlemen. Suddenly the same skills they used in corporate procurement give them an edge in building a product business with strong demographic tailwinds. Same framework, totally different outcome. For me, it's heating and cooling and the energy transition. For them, it could be mobility equipment and demographics. Once you've mapped out your own zone of genius, I encourage you to mix and match it with different tailwinds and see what ideas come out.
So now that we've actually identified the kind of industry that we want to work in, how do we actually find businesses that we can buy? In Buy Then Build and Main Street Millionaire, they actually advocate for different approaches. So in the next episode, I'm going to explain what these two approaches are and how I've tackled this problem for myself.